Hey YouTube, this is Kelvin. And continuing my beginner series, I wanted to go over a chess concept called castling or to castle. And basically what we're meaning with that is we're trying to get the king into one of the corners of the board because naturally the king is very vulnerable and dangerous in the center of the board. So we want to try to get it to one of the sides of the board. And so I wanted to explain to you guys how to correctly castle and the rules associated with it. It is something that almost happens in every single chess game played, but uh, not everybody knows all of the rules associated with it. So let's go ahead and take a look at the rules. Now, basically, the act of castling is naturally you can move the rook in this direction, or you can also move this rook in this direction, in this particular position. You can also move the king one square over legally, one square diagonally legally, or one square over legally. And so the proper way that you want to castle is to first grab your king and basically make an illegal move with it, either to this side or to this side. And what I'm meaning with that is you're going to take the king and move it two squares over into the direction that you want to castle. And then you're going to bring the rook right next to the king on the other side. And that completes the act of castling on this particular side. Now, if you wanted to do it on the other side, you would literally do the same thing. It's just going to be, one square farther with the rook. So it's going to be two squares over and then bring the rook on the other side of the king. Now, if we back up a little bit, as you guys know, you can only move the king legally one square at a time. So like I said before, you can only move the king here or here or here. So basically, if you take the king and you move it illegally two squares over, this is automatically signaling your intent to castle. So like I said, you got two squares over and you just bring the rook on the other side. Or two squares over, bring the rook on the other side. And that is the correct way to castle. Now, I'm going to show you the incorrect way to castle. And this is actually done quite a bit. It's even been done. There's a video of Anatoly Karpov and Jan Nepomniachtchi playing. And as you know, Anatoly Karpov is the former world champion. And he even castled this way at one point. I think it was a blitz game or something. But sometimes you'll see people, they're intending to get their king. So it's like they know what they want to do. But they might move their rook first and then move the king second. Or if you do it on this side, you have the rook over and then moving the king. Now that's incorrect because somebody can actually claim that if you move your rook and you let your rook go to move your king and you do your king like that, they can argue to the arbiter that you intended only to move your rook right here and that you weren't trying to castle. So like I said, you always want to make sure somebody can never say that you intended to do this with your rook, and then an arbiter would come over and would make you basically move your king back. So this first initial movement of the king, two squares over to this side or two squares over to that side, like there's no arguing that is intending to castle your king. Now, so let's go over a couple of the different rules associated with it. So, like I said, in this particular position, you can do this motion, castle, right? Okay, so let's go back. Now, one of the rules with castling is you can never move your king through an attacked square, or you can never have it land on a square that's attacked. So if we just tweak the position a little bit and move this bishop back here, you will see now this bishop is controlling this diagonal. And so naturally, if you want to go through and do the proper motion castling, you're going to try to move two squares over and then bring the rook over. But if you notice, the initial movement of the castling puts this king in that diagonal. And so you cannot legally castle on this side of the board. Now you can still castle because there's nothing obstructing this side, so you can still, castle this way, right? And so let's tweak it just a little bit more. So let's say that we let's move this back right. let's say that you have this position and it's black's turn to move. So if I want to castle my king, I would go 2 squares over, and then now I'm castled. Now, if you notice, this file is completely open, and so this rook has reign over this file. So then that means that the king cannot pass through this square to do the castling process. So like we said before, you cannot castle on this side of the board. You would be forced to castle on this side of the board if you wanted to get castled. So one last thing here. Let's go ahead and put the position back the way we had it initially. So let's say we took these pawns off the board so that we make it even. And let's say we move this bishop over here. So as you notice, this bishop is attacking this diagonal, right? But let's say you want to try to castle on that side of the board. If you move 2 squares over and then you complete the castling, you notice that your king didn't get into this diagonal that's attacked by this bishop. But you might be thinking, well, wait a minute, like the rook had to pass through, right? It's kind of weird, but so the rook is allowed to pass through an attack square, but the king is not. So like I said, go 2 over, 1 over. And even though the rook does pass through an attack square, it's not an absolute no-no because it's not the king. So we back up. Okay, so like I said before, you have this side castling this way. You have this side castling this way. And like I said, if the king ever has to pass through an attack square or land on an attack square, it cannot castle. Also, one last thing. If you've ever moved your king or a rook on either side that you're trying to castle on, then you cannot castle on that side. Castling requires you to have not moved both pieces that are involved in the castling action. So let's say, for example, you moved your king over here at some point. Let's say make a random move here, and then you move the king back. So you've gotten back to the initial position of your pieces, but you've already compromised your king and moved it. So now you couldn't do this. And the same thing with the rook. So let's say you want to move, you want to castle to that side. But let's say you do that with your rook, and then somebody makes a move and you move back. So you're thinking, okay, well, I have the same position that I had initially. So, I mean, can I just castle just like normal? No, like I said, you can't do that because you've already moved one of the pieces, that are involved in the actual castling. So like I said, you can't move the king into an attack square. You can't have moved either rook or the king for the side that you're trying to castle on. Yeah. And, you can't pass the king through any attack squares. All right, guys, that is the proper way to castle. And those are all the rules associated with castling. So hopefully you guys are doing it correctly in the future. And you guys have learned and gotten the knowledge that you need to play successful chess games in the future. All right, I appreciate it, guys. I'll see you next time. All right.